In Chapter 4, we're going to go through some differential analysis and look at different situations to try to determine what is best for the company. We'll go through understanding some different costing alternatives as well as looking at what effect does that have on the short term and long term. So there's going to be a lot more definitions that you can look up to know for this chapter. So make sure you do that and understand each one. When I'm looking for you to understand special order or make or buy or add or drop, what I want you to understand here is first of all, what is the situation? For example, special order, we know that we're looking at a short run, one time situation. So when I'm taking that into account, that's going to have different pricing alternatives. I want to be careful to make sure I have a positive contribution margin. And what effect does my fixed costs have, and are there other costs that I need to consider? Then you're going to look at if you have additional income, then you would accept. You also have to look at what kind of opportunity costs you have, as well as if you have the capacity to make these items and what else you could be using that space for. So that's some of the thoughts I want you to get into each of these decisions that we'll be looking at. But let's run through some examples of these decisions. Again, there's some equations to know for this chapter. Just make sure you go get those in here so that you can use this as a study guide. So we're going to go through some examples from your book. Again, these examples are now getting much longer because what they want you to do is really be able to pull apart the information that you need. So we'll spend a little bit more time doing that and making sure you understand where your starting point is. So in this first example, this is 4-40 in your book. We're looking at a special order situation. So we might want to note that in your notes so that if you need to come back and look at this, you know this one is a special order example. And to do that, what I'm going to start off with is looking at that per unit cost. So this is my typical per unit cost. But what I really need to do is make sure I go through and read that paragraph to see what additional information is important, what is relevant. So they have a special situation. They can buy 7,500 thermostats at a price of $60 each. Their regular price is $100. You know what? We really don't care. So we're going to cross that out. We're not going to take that into consideration when we're looking at how much additional money we have. They have the capacity. We want to make sure of that. And we currently produce 100,000 units. They require that each unit uses this special branding. So it's an additional $2 per unit cost. That's going to come, it's a material cost that'll come into play, as well as this one-time rental. So this is an equipment charge of $200,000. We should note that this is not a per unit basis, so this is an additional fixed cost. So we want to go through and make sure that we would still be making money on this product, and then whether or not we should accept this order. So what I'm going to do first is go through and look at this special order and look at what are my cost per unit. The materials cost, I need to add that additional $2. So really my per unit materials cost is $38. That labor does not change, but my variable overhead does not change. And for this special order only, I have a $20,000 fixed cost. if I look at that on a per unit basis, there's, do we need, no, we don't really need to. So let's not look at that. So let's go through and see how this affects our decision making. So here are my variable costs. And I think that's all we need to so far to move forward. And what they're going to ask you to do is build out a very simple income statement that shows what does our process look like now and how much money are we making, what happens if we take this alternative, this special order, and what are the differences. So I'm going to erase this now because I do need that to build out my original scenario of 100,000 units. So let me come down here where I have a schedule made, and this first box we're going to put, this is, you know, our normal status quo. That's what your book refers to it as, which means just keeping everything as is. This is my alternative, which is accepting that special order. And then we're going to look at what the difference is. And in your homework, it wants you to note whether this is higher or lower. What effect is it having? So we'll look at our sales. We'll look at all of those variable costs, which include those direct materials, labor, and our variable overhead. That's going to give us our total, our contribution margin. Then we're going to subtract those fixed costs. Oh, actually, your book gives you another. I'm going to do it just like your book so you have a good example. Your book does give those total variable cost before giving you that contribution margin. Then I would subtract out those fixed costs, all to get to my profit, or operating profit. So why status quo? Sales, if you remember, were the normal selling price is $100,000 or $100, and we sell 100,000 units. Because this is these are large numbers, I'm going to do this all in thousands. I think your homework also has a couple of problems like that where they put it all in thousands. Just makes it a little easier, takes out a couple of those zeros. So 100 times 100,000, taking out that additional 1,000 is going to give me 10,000. Now, my alternative, we'll go through just in our sales for right now, would add an additional 7,500 times only those $60 per unit. So this part is giving me my sales for the alternative, which would add another 450,000. So 10,450, giving me a difference of 450, which is higher. Now let's go through those variable costs. Take a quick back look here. Some of our variable costs, if we're looking at the status quo, we're looking at these numbers here for our variable costs, whereas our special orders giving us different variable costs in the materials section. So for materials, that would be the 100,000 times the, I already forgot, 36, which is going to give me the 3,600. taking off those zeros. And labor was $14. These numbers are easy because it's 100,000 units and 400. So that's going to give me a total variable cost of $5,400, leaving me a contribution margin of sales minus variable costs of $4,600. Subtract out those fixed costs to give me a profit of $2,800. Now my goal here is to make a profit more than $2,800, and if I do, I would accept this special order. So now remember those materials, I have that $3,600 I'm going to add, but now I have $38 times that $7,500 to add to that. So that's an additional $285,000. So this would then equal 3,885. My labor is still $14 per unit. So 14, it doesn't change. I can then take 14 times the 107,500 for that alternative, which would give me 1,505. My variable costs are just $4. If I take that $4 times the 107,500, that will give me 430. I will then find my total variable cost just by adding these three numbers up, which is 5,820. Then I take my sales minus my variable to get my contribution margin of 4,630. So again, as a reminder, sales minus variable costs equals that contribution margin. So then I can bring in my fixed costs. Now remember, my fixed costs, I needed to add an additional 20,000. So that's 1,820, giving me a profit of 2,810. The 4,630 minus the 1,820. Now I'm making money. I'm making an additional $10, which is higher. So I would accept. But let's just go through each item and show you. They're not real picky about negative numbers here, just so you know. But we're just going to look at what is the difference between each of these numbers. 30, 20, 30, and 20. And they're all actually higher. So we would accept this project because we're making money. But the other question is in C, determine the minimum quantity in the special order that would make it profitable, assuming capacity is available. So how many do I need to make in order to accept this special order? What this is asking is, what is my break even? How much do they have to sell to break even? So I need to consider my fixed cost and kind of pull in some information from that last chapter, which is fixed over my contribution margin per unit. Right? So remember that. Now we're only considering only the special order. So this is only for that special order. The fixed cost in the special order was $20,000. The contribution margin per unit, we need to figure out. We have all of these variable costs. So remember, to get that contribution margin, it's sales. I'm selling these at $60. I would subtract the 38, subtract the 14, subtract the 4, and that equals 4. So that break-even point is 5,000. So that's an example of your special order. Now let's move on. We'll go to some of the other questions in this chapter that they are considering. This next one, 4-47, this is a make or buy. So what they're trying to determine is, should I make the product on my own, or should I go ahead and buy it from someone else? So again, they're looking, the first thing what they're going to do is give you a whole bunch of information. You got to pull out what you need, and then we're going to build that very simple financial statement again and do a comparison. So we're going to look at our status quo, or what does it look like if I buy? What does it look like if I make? What's the difference? And is it higher or lower? There's some other questions that we have to ask ourselves with these types of decisions, which we'll get to later. So we're going to look at some of the costs that go into the make or buy and compare those costs. When we're looking to buy it, the really only thing you need to consider is the cost to buy. The cost to buy is 60 cents. I read through this and I know that it just tells me that to purchase these cookies is 60 cents each. Some of the other things when we're looking at, that's the only thing we need to consider when we're looking at if I buy it. We want to find our total cost. Now for making it, we have those 3 product costs, and we're going to look at our materials. We're going to look at the direct labor and our variable overhead. Now it does tell us that somewhere, it says there's 45 cents of overhead, which includes 30 cents for fixed overhead. These are the words I want you to look for. Total fixed overhead for the company would not increase. Therefore, that portion of it that is fixed is not relevant in the decision, and we would not include it. So we're only including those relevant costs. So for direct materials, it tells us it's 20 cents to make this cookie, 15 cents for labor, and then it goes into the 45 cents, but of that 30 is fixed, so we have to include 15 cents for that variable overhead. So the total cost to make this cookie is 50 cents. Now we look at the differences. It's 60 cents lower if we buy the cookie. It's 20 cents higher if we buy the cookie, because these are the alternatives we're considering. And the difference, so the difference is 10 cents, and it's 10 cents lower to make the cookie rather than buy the cookie. So should Mel continue to buy the cookies? No, they should make the cookies. But then we want to consider some alternatives. So if then Mel suddenly has an opportunity to sell box dinners, the new opportunity would use that extra capacity that they have, and they would make $3,000 off of that annually. That contribution margin is telling you how much they're going to make. So if they decide to sell these dinners, what is the total cost for making and buying the cookies? This comes into play because that 30% of unused capacity could only be used if we buy the cookies, right? So that means that this $3,000, if we want to make the cookies, is an opportunity cost. And that needs to be considered when we're looking at how much it really costs us to make these items. So if I want to say the total cost of making the cookies would then change. If I want to make the cookies, I'm going to have to say this is going to cost me, not only I'm making 20,000 cookies, they each cost me 50 cents to make, but I also have to add in that $3,000 opportunity cost, the amount that I'm going to give up if I decide to make these cookies. So the total cost then would be $13,000. If I then decide to buy the cookies, my total cost would just be that 20,000 times 0.6, which would equal $12,000. So if I have the opportunity to sell these box dinners, then I would want to buy the cookies. One more problem to go through. This is problem 4-49 in your book, if you want to follow along. And this one we're going to go through looks at whether we should make or add or drop. It's looking at adding or dropping a segment. So here they're telling you that strawberry line is not making money. So should we automatically get rid of that strawberry line? There's a little bit more to consider besides just looking at that bottom line as it is right now. So when we look at this, again, we're going to just build this little financial statement showing us the alternatives. First, we're going to look at the status quo, what it is now. Then we're going to consider the alternative, which would be to drop the strawberry line. And then we're going to look at the difference. So I'm going to look at the revenue that each one brings in. We're going to subtract out those variable costs to come down to our contribution margin. Subtract those fixed costs. I need one more line here, which would then equal that profit. So status quo, if I go through and keep everything as is, I'm going to get these numbers just by going through and adding each of these up. So if I add across of 65.2, 85.6, and 102.4, that equals 253,200. I would bring that down to my revenues. Variable costs, same thing. I'm going to add straight across of 44.72 and 80. This equals 201,400. Then I take my sales minus my variable cost to get my contribution margin. Subtract out those fixed costs. Just by adding up each one of those, I get to 35,600 to give me a profit of 16,200. So you can see if I look at this in total, I am still making a profit. So what's going to happen if I choose to then, let me erase this. What happens if I choose to get rid of this whole strawberry division? What is that going to happen to my overall numbers? So here again, I'm just going to add across and see what happens. If I only have those two numbers to add, that's 167,600. Variable costs, if I add those two numbers together, 124,200, which would give me a contribution margin of 43,400. Now those fixed costs kind of make a difference, because this is where that reading comes in. The company's total fixed costs would only be reduced by 20%. So to get to that fixed cost portion, I'm actually going to take that 35,600 and times that by 80%, because only 20% of those fixed costs are going to go away. So if I take 35,600 times that by 80%, I should get 28,480. So my fixed costs are going to be 28,480. And for some reason we need to put those brackets in here, which would give me an operating profit of 14,920. So now let's look at the differences. The difference here, we're just taking the status quo, subtracting the alternative, and I would get 85,600. This is going to be a decrease. 77,200, which is going to be a decrease. 8,400, also going to be a decrease. Those fixed costs are going to go down by 71,20, should be a decrease, giving me a net profit of 1,280. So the question is, should we still drop this product line? The answer is no, because if I drop it, I'm actually losing money. If I drop that strawberry, my income, my profit would go down. It would decrease by that 1,280. So we want to make sure we keep that strawberry product line, because even though it's losing money, overall it's helping our business. So hopefully all of that gives you some examples to start with. There's more in-depth questions that you're going to get into. If you need help with those, just send me a quick email.